Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of Friedrich Nietzsche's The Spoke Zarathustra book. It's been witty, insightful, and pretty introspective, I must say, and makes us think about all kinds of stuff. So, let us continue upon this nerdy journey, shall we? Let's begin. Bismillah. This section is titled On the Three Evils. Let's begin. Bismillah. In a dream, in the last dream of the morning, I stood in the foothills today. Beyond the world, held scales and waited the world. Alas, the jealous dawn came too early and glowed me awake. She is always jealous of my glowing morning dreams. That is an interesting thing how you'll wake up like because of the sunlight. Right as like your dream is like at this cuffs point. It's pretty strange. Measurable by him who has time, weighable by a good weigher, reachable by strong wings, guessable by a divine nutcracker. Thus my dream found the world. My dream, a bold sailor, half ship, half hurricane, taciturn as butterflies, impatient as falcons. How did it have the patience or the time to weigh the world? Did my wisdom secretly urge it? My laughing, wide awake, day wisdom which mocks all infinite worlds. For it speaks, wherever there is force, number will become mistress. She has more force. How surely my dream looked upon this finite world, not inquisitively. So, finite world, his dream looked upon. So we have different types of, so far we have two types of dreams. The one where he's actually asleep, and then the one while he's actually awake. So, an awaken, and then asleep. Okay. Not inquisitively, not acquisitively, not afraid, not begging, as if a full apple offered itself to my hand, a ripe golden apple, with cool, soft velvet skin. Thus the world offered itself to me, as if a tree waved to me branched. So a tree waved to me branched, strong-willed, bent as a support, even as a footstool, for one weary of his day. Thus the world stood of my foothills, as if delicate hands carried a shrine toward me, a shrine open for the delight of bashful, adoring eyes. A shrine. Thus the world offered itself to me today. Not riddle enough to frighten away human love, not solution enough to put to sleep human wisdom. A humanly good thing the world was to me today, though one speaks so much evil of it. So you're noticing what's wrong in the world, but also seeing what's good in it. So the world can be quite rough on us, but also he's highlighting here how can actually give us some reprieve by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How shall I thank my morning dream that I thus weighed the world this morning? As a humanly good thing it came to me, this dream and heart comforter, and to imitate it by day, and to learn from it what was best in it. I shall now place the three most evil things on the scales, and weigh them humanly well. Weigh them humanly well. He that taught to bless also taught to curse. What are the three best curses? Best cursed things in the world. So, that's kind of a weird phrase, isn't it? The best cursed, the coldest, hottest. We could say the most cursed, but I think he chose the word best for a reason. I shall put them on the scales, sex, the lust to rule, selfishness. These three have so far been best cursed and worst reputed and lied about. These three I will weigh humanly well. So, selfishness, intimacy. I'm not just gonna repeat the S word over and over because my children are playing. The lust to rule. So that desire, that craving. Remember the hadith that talked about not giving an opportunity to one who seeks it. I'm summarizing it. But it was a hadith that was like, if you're seeking power, you're going to seek someone who doesn't actively seek it. I'm probably butchering that hadith, but that was the gist of it. Well then, here are my foothills, and there the sea that rolls towards me. Shaggy, flattering, the faithful old 100-headed canine mustard that I love. Well then, here I will hold the scales over the rolling sea, and a witness I choose to look on, you, solitary tree, fragrant and broad-vaulted, that I love. Broad-vaulted, that's a nice phrase. So the tree, it's like very wide, heavy branches and its twigs going off, right? Sounds nice. So an established tree, old, fragrant. Pine trees are very fragrant. On what bridge does the present pass to the future? By what compulsion does the higher compel itself to the lower? And what bids even the highest grow still higher? Now the scales are balanced and still. 3 weighty questions I throw on it. 3 weighty answers balance the other scale. Okay, so questions. So he's gonna weigh the questions, and then the answers will be on a scale. That's unique. I didn't think of that. So, weighing answers. Okay, number 2. Intimacy to all hair-shirted despisers of the body. They are thorn and stake, and accursed as world among all the afterworldly, because it mocks and fools all teachers of error and confusion. Intimacy for the rabble, the slow fire on which they are burned, for all worm-eaten wood and all stinking rags, the ever-ready rotten oven. Intimacy for free hearts, innocent and free, the garden happiness of earth, the future's exuberant gratitude to the present. Ooh, that's a very unique way of putting it. The future's exuberant gratitude to the present. That's like a very poetic line. Like the future is excited and joyful. The present and will show its gratitude by granting fertility. Intimacy only for the wilted, a sweet poison for the lion-willed. Yeah, sweet poison for the lion-willed. Reminds me of that guy, who was it, Samson in the Bible? There's tons of examples where, let's think of the Unsullied when they go into one of the Unsullied who goes into the brothels of Marine, and she takes out a blade, his throat, and he didn't expect that, right? He's lion-hearted, he's a warrior. They don't have their twig and berries because they're Unsullied. They're eunuchs. But he's brave, but it was a sweet poison come from a woman and his life was ended. And that was an interesting example of how men can seek that out, and they can be very bold and brave, and they can get destroyed. There's several other fictional and real-world examples as well. However, the great invigoration of the heart and the reverently reserved wine of wines, intimacy, the happiness that is the great parable of a higher happiness and the highest hope. For too many is marriage promised, and more than marriage, to many who are stranger to each other than man and woman, and who can wholly comprehend how strange man and women are to each other. That's interesting. The woke say that men in dresses are women, that women can be men if they grow beards with testosterone injections. They erase the beauty that is men and women, down to our different bone structures, different roles. They totally erase it and absolutely hate our differences and allow men to compete in our sports, to be forced into our locker rooms, to teach boys to hate what's between their legs and girls to hate their breasts that feed their children, to bind them down and get them removed. So, androgyny is the mode of today. So, those who don't appreciate and comprehend how different men and women are to each other force androgyny. It's very sad. But I want to have fences around my thoughts, and even around my words, lest swine and swooners break into my garden. Yes, I agree with that. That's why I think going and having some paywall, putting certain things on private mode. I learned hard way that if you don't have some type of barriers, then you're gonna have some people just come in and just try to troll and ruin things. It's very, very good point in a very poetic way. The lust to rule. Okay, now we're on that one. So we're done with the intimacy one. The scalding scourge of the hardest among the hard-hearted. The hideous torture that is saved up for the cruelest. The dark flame of living pyres. The lust to rule. So here, the scalding scourge. When something scalds you, like, oh, like it permanently disfigures you. So, to scald is, it disfigures you, and then to scourge it is even worse, right? Like, it cannot be beautiful. It's like a burden. And then the hardest among the hard-hearted. So you can imagine how cold that type of people are. Pol Pot, for example. The lust to rule, the malicious gadfly imposed on the vainest peoples. The mocker of all uncertain virtues. The rider on every horse and every pride. The lust to rule, the earthquake that breaks open everything worm-eaten and hollow. The rumbling, grumbling punisher that breaks open whited sepulchres. The lightning-like question mark beside premature answers. So the earthquake that breaks open things. I mean, corruption, like the bureaucrats who aren't doing their job and they're just eroding the foundations of the nation. And you gotta break open that wood, see where the rot is, get rid of them bugs and plant a new tree, you know, in a metaphorical sense. The lust to rule, before whose glances man crawls and ducks and slaves and becomes lower than snake and swine. I do fine. Oh, I need some water. I mean some coffee. The lust to rule, before whose glances man crawls and ducks and slaves and becomes lower than snake and swine, until finally the great contempt cries out of him. The great contempt whose glances people crawl for. So, we call ourselves the slaves of Allah, and everything will happen as Allah wills. And we will prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via our prayers. But the desire to rule, some people, they will do much for it. That is true. And you have to be very, very careful of that desire. What will you do for it? Like, look how these celebrities, some of these rappers, they're acting all tough in their videos, but they were getting R-worded by P. Diddy, right? Women were doing it for the longest time. Women in the WWE/WWF, Vince McMahon, they would do stuff with him in order to get some stupid thing for their career. Like, they want power, money, and status, and they'll do really strange things in order to get it. The lust to rule, the terrible teacher of the great contempt, who preaches away with you to the very faces of cities and empires, until it finally cries out of them themselves, away with me. So this shows a lot about how too many bad leaders, they lead their empires to destruction, cities to destruction, sort of like when Pol Pot just carpet bombed some places of his. You think how Germany, he pretty much destroyed so many German lives and cities. You look at how the leader of Japan during World War II, he was so reckless, ended up causing, because he did Pearl Harbor, right? The 2 nuclear bombs. So leaders can make poor tactical decisions and lead to so many horrible outcomes. And then at the end, they're done away with. The lust to rule, which, however, alas ascends, luringly to the pure and lonely, and up to self-sufficient heights, glowing like a love that luringly paints crimson fulfillment on earthly skies. The lust to rule, but who would call it lust when that is high longs downward for power? So, what is high longs downward for power. Verily, there is nothing diseased or lustful in such longing and condescending, that the lonely heights should not remain lonely and self-sufficient eternally, that the mountain should descend to the valley, and the winds of the height to the low plains. Oh, who were to find the right name for such longing, gift-giving virtue, thus Zarathustra once named the unnameable. And at that time it also happened, and verily it happened for the first time, that his word pronounced selfish, blessed the wholesome, healthy selfishness that wells from a powerful soul to which belongs the high body. So powerful soul, high body, beautiful, triumphant, to which refreshing, around which everything becomes a mirror. The supple, persuasive body, the dancer whose parable and epitome is the self-enjoying soul. Self-enjoying soul. The self-enjoyment of such bodies and souls calls itself virtue. With its words about good and bad, such self-enjoyment screens itself, as with sacred groves. Sacred groves, so the screening, I think of hedges. You plant your plants in a certain way, yeah, your groves will be shaded and screened off from passerbys. With the names of its happiness, it banishes from its presence whatever is contemptible. So, with the names of happiness, what is contemptible is taken out. So, contemptible. So that then makes you realize in order for happiness to be about, you need to get a lot of contemptible things out of your presence, such as open drug use, loitering for prostitution, lewdness, gangs. From its presence, it banishes whatever is cowardly. It says, bad that is cowardly. Contemptible to its mind is anyone who always worries, sighs, is miserable, and also anyone who picks up even the smallest advantages. Notice this. So, worrywart, sighs, like, they're just like, you ever seen someone who does that a lot? They just really don't like their job. Miserable, so they can't find the joy anymore. Picks up the smallest advantages. That to me sounds like drama merchants. Drama merchants. Contrarians. Okay, so let's dig into this. Like, for example, Temple will always say World War III. The end is nigh. Sky is falling. He puts a lot of nihilistic worries upon people. Yet he has no children. Won't marry his woman. And he has a couple chickens. Chicken City, he calls it. But he skateboards and is trying to be a musician at his age. It's really a midlife crisis, and he hides his baldness under his beanie in order to appear young, and he's just a very strange individual. But he pumps in a lot of worries into people, and it's really quite bizarre. And when you see people who are just never happy, that can drag you down. But another thing here about the smallest advantage is some people they will do consistent contrarian videos, picking fights with people in order to get some views and to gain the advantage of being the one who calls out someone first. There's genuine criticisms, but then there's people who, whatever new trending thing is happening and they want to put their 2 cents in, they don't know when to sit out, and they want to be an insufferable know-it-all, then you begin to see that they are picking up any small advantage. They won't even let something pass by. And that's when I think you get into a person who is quite cowardly, because they can't even confront their own desire for attention. Because remember, he talked about that lust for, it's a great evil for that lust for power. So there are people who, they want to maintain that attention ever-growing rates at all costs. And so they will take up any small advantage to do so. It's quite strange. So when you see these sentences here, think about how that would apply into your life. When have you noticed something like that in your life? And then it'll make more sense. That's how I do it. It also despises all wisdom that wallows in grief. For verily there is also wisdom that blooms in the dark, a nightshade wisdom which always sighs, all is vain. Shy mistrust is also in low esteem. Also anyone who wants oaths instead of eyes and hands. Also all wisdom that is all too mistrustful, for that is the manner of cowardly souls. And still lower esteem it holds the subservient, the dog-like, who immediately lie on their backs, the humble. And there is wisdom too, that is humble and dog-like, and pious and subservient. Altogether hateful, and nauseating it finds those who never offer resistance, who swallow poisonous spittle, and even glances, the all too patient, all suffering, always satisfied, for that is servile. The all too patient. Will the one be servile before gods and gods' kicks, or before men and stupid men's opinions? Whatever is servile it spits on. This blessed selfishness, bad, that is what it calls everything that is sorely stooped and sordid servile. Sordidly servile. Unfree blink eyes, oppressed hearts, and that false yielding manner that kisses with wide cowardly lips. A sham wisdom, that is what it calls the would-be wit of the servile, and old and weary, and especially the whole wicked, nitwit, witless foolishness of priests. Ooh, witless foolishness of priests. He's done smacking. The shamwise, however, all the priests, the world weary, and all those whose souls are womanish. Ooh, womanish souls, how dare you, gender, and servile. Oh, what wicked tricks has their trickery always played on the selfishness. And what was considered virtue and called virtue was playing wicked tricks on selfishness and selfless. That is how all these world-weary cowards and cross-marked spiders wanted themselves for good reasons. But for all these, the day is now at an end. The change, the sword of judgment, the great noon, much shall be revealed here. And whoever proclaims the ego wholesome and holy and selfishness blessed, verily he will also tell what he knows. For telling, verily, it is at hand, it is near, the great noon. Thus spoke Zarathustra. So here, I find that interesting. He really is prone to show what he thinks is might and what he thinks is full-heartedness. And so this section that we just read highlights that. Contempt. Made me think of drama merchants. He mentioned dog-like, mistrusting, that there is wisdom that blooms in the dark. And I think that's true. Like, when things can feel so dark, there's a lesson to be learned regardless. So, wisdoms are like insights that we take with us from experiences, usually. Or from, reading stuff, but the way wisdom is acquired and such, that can really highlight much for us. Now, the next section says, on the spirit of gravity. My tongue is of the people. I speak too crudely and heartily for Angora rabbits, and my speech sounds even stranger to all inkfish and pen hacks. So, inkfish, pen hacks. So, when I think of an inkfish, like you're fishing, like when you put your hook in the water, you're really trying to catch something. I put my finger on the page, I'm scanning the sea of like ink and trying to catch something, an idea, right? So we're swimming in the words of pages. We're sailors on the seas of words and ideas. Pen hacks. So people who are just writing, scribes, authors, you name it. People who work by the pen. There's a lot of ways you can take those phrases, but that's how I see it. My hand is a fool's hand. Beware, all tables and walls and whatever else still offers room for foolish frill or scribbling skill. Foolish frill, scribbling skill. Chicken scratch. My foot is a cloven foot. With it I trample and trot over sticks and stones, crisscross. And I am happy as the devil while running so fast. So the cloven foot, I think, is a reference towards when you're not supposed to eat animals with the cloven hoof. I remember in the Old Testament, someone said, my stomach is it an eagle's stomach? For it likes lamb best of all. Certainly it is the stomach of some bird, nourished on innocent things. Now, if you're not aware, there are some eagles that snatch baby sheep, It's very rare now because the population of those birds is so low, but there definitely was a time where you would see a bird, straight up snatch small critter. Hawks taking baby ducks, even crows will take a baby squirrel, So, love it. And on little ready and impatient to fly off. That happens to be my way. How could there not be something of the bird's way in that? And above all, I am an enemy of the spirit of gravity. Ooh. Gravity weighs you down, keeps you... You're not gonna soar like the bird. It feels like a weight. Like, when you lift weights, you're going to, you're all gonna get gravity and you build muscle. But gravity is a very fascinating thing when you think about our planet. Now, I wouldn't want to be floating around in space. That would be horrible. Like, no, ew. So, you know, there's a poetic way to see gravity. That is the bird's way. And verily, a sworn enemy, arch enemy, primordial enemy, oh, where has not my enmity flown and misflown in the past? Of that I could well sing a song, and will sing it. And although I am alone in an empty house, and must sing it to my own ears, there are other singers, of course, whose throats are made mellow, whose hands are made talkative, whose eyes are made expressive, whose hearts are awakened only by a packed house. But I am not like those. So he's someone who can be in solitude, a hermit. So the hermit versus the social butterfly. And then it was another term, it's like just being a introvert, someone who's also content with their own company. 2. He who will one day teach men to fly will have moved all boundary stones. The boundary stones themselves will fly up into the air before him, and he will rebaptize the earth, the light one. The ostrich runs faster than the fastest horse. Is that true? I don't think so. I'll have to check that out. But even he buries his head gravely into the grave earth. Even so, the man who has not yet learned to fly, earth and life seem too grave to him, and thus the spirit of gravity wants it. But whoever would become light and a bird must love himself. Thus I teach. Okay, so whoever want to become light and unweighted by the burdens of the earth, you have to love yourself. So does that mean the narcissist? The narcissist is like, I only love myself. I'm so selfish. I'm a psychotic piece of garbage. Come on now, Nietzsche. But if you don't like yourself and you're self-hating, then you're stuck in a rut. So I do get that. Like, you'll see some whiny incels, or you'll see some women who they've kind of just given up and gone into the woe is me phase, and you have to be like, just stop it. Not to be sure with the love of the wilting and wasting, for among those even self-love stinks. One must learn to love oneself, thus I teach, with a wholesome and healthy love. So wholesome love, healthy love, so that one can bear to be with oneself and not roam. So, do you actually like yourself? So, some people, they have a lot of screens. I remember I talked about this before. There was a woman who had, like, on her phone was something, on the TV was something, and then on a tablet there was something else. So, like, there was a soccer game, and then there was something else, and something else. Now, I do use, like, I'll listen to a podcast, but then I have YouTube Premium, so I can have mini player, and then I'll look at pictures of mountains, or pictures of sushi, or cake designs, or animals, something like that, while that's going on, because, you know, if there's not visuals, then I multitask. You know, you get two things done at once, and I still pay attention to what's being said. But that's a little different, and I'm fine being in silence, and I do that every day. I put on sounds of the rain. Okay, that's not pure silence. I have done it with silence, but because I'm putting my child down for a nap, I put white noise to help her sleep. So I'm fine with being with my own thoughts, you know. So I don't have to escape my own self. So when he says need not roam, I don't need to roam away from myself. I don't need to alienate myself. I don't need to alienate myself from myself. I can think of things and keep myself entertained. But there are some people who, they don't want to be alone with their own thoughts, so they are constantly using a distraction to roam away from their own consciousness. Such roaming baptizes its self-love of the neighbor. With this phrase, the best lies and hypocrisies have been perpetrated so far, and especially by such as were a grave burden for all the world. And verily, this is no command for today and tomorrow, to learn to love oneself. Rather, it is of all arts the subtlest, the most cunning, the ultimate, and the most patient. For whatever is his own is well concealed from the owner. For whatever is his own is well concealed from the owner, and of all treasures it is our own that we dig up last. Thus the spirit of gravity orders it. Oh, that's an interesting one. You go digging for gold in the minds of others, but do you go into your inner space, see what you can reveal? We are presented with grave words and values almost from the cradle. Good and evil, this gift is called. For its sake we are forgiven for living. We are forgiven for living? That's funny. And therefore one suffers little children to come unto one in order to forbid them bedtimes to love themselves. Thus the spirit of gravity orders it. So we see here he's repeating this phrase. Repetition is a thing he does. And we carry faithfully what one gives us to bear, and hard shoulders and over rough mountains. And should we sweat? We are told, yes, life is a grave burden. But only man is a grave burden for himself. That is because he carries on his shoulders too much that is alien to him. Someone is a grave burden for themselves because you're carrying something that is alien to you. Alien to you. Like a camel, he kneels down and lets himself be well loaded. Ooh. Letting oneself be loaded. You know, like taking on the burdens of others, this is why you gotta be really careful. People will call it cold if you're not trying to solve everyone's problems, but you can't solve everyone's problems. You have to mitigate how many people you respond to. That's why people who respond to, like, I understand why some people have a paywall, because that filters out a lot of people who would just weigh you down with all their problems without any solutions in sight, and you'd be again to just hear sad story after sad story. But if you have a manageable flow of people telling you something that might disturb your mood, then it becomes more feasible, becomes more manageable. You can't be loaded down with everyone's problems, because then you won't be able to have mental space for your own. Knowing that carrying capacity. So each ship, plane, has a carrying capacity. Horses have a limit to how much they can be put on their backs. We have that as well. And so we have to figure out how much can we take on. And if people are judging us, like, oh, I wanted to talk to you about this, or why didn't you help me with that? Like, I can't. Like, you got to be able to know your limits, because if you don't, you'll blow your back out. You'll blow your mind out. You'll just be too oppressed, too weighted. Especially the strong, reverent spirit that would bear much. He loads too many alien, grave words and values on himself, and then life seems a desert to him. That is very interesting, because you're overburdening yourself. You don't get to see the joys and the oasis that you live in, the blessings. This is kind of like when women think they can have it all. I want to be the CEO, boss babe. I want to do this, this, and this, and then they say, I don't have time for myself. Or it's like the balance of having downtime, of relaxation and rejuvenation in order to let your mind flow. And then there's the being too sloth-like and not getting anything done, and being lethargic and being high on drugs. Because these people will load themselves up with drugs, allow their brains to be entertained with slop, and then they come out of that highness, they see the world is bleak, they want to escape back into the illusory realm, and they stay there and become worse drug addicts. Then there's people who are on the hamster wheel of work, getting laid up with all these duties to where they feel like life is just an endless hamster wheel, and they don't even get to stop and smell the roses and realize that they're this human on this marvelous planet, and see the stars above their head and realize how small they are and temporal life is. So they lose that magnanimity of their own minds. So the perspective. So too much burdens shifts your perspectives, and not enough trials make you have a distorted perspective. So we're seeing here an equilibrium, a balance has to be achieved. And verily much that is our own is also a grave burden. And much that is inside man, it's like an oyster, nauseating and slippery and hard to grasp. Well, I mean, if you have a fresh oyster, it's pretty good. It can taste like cucumbers, you know, depending on the purity of the water. I can eat raw oysters. They're really good. Just shuck them. It's really nice. You put a little lime, a little bit of Tabasco hot sauce. It's really good. You also put tartar sauce, cocktail sauce. You know, but they're attached. You have to use your knife to like sever that little thing in them. I forgot what it's called. But it is slippery, though. You know. Oh no! The oyster tastes as good as the water it's grown in because they're filter feeders. So that a noble shell with a noble embellishment must plead for it. But this art, too, one must learn to have a shell, and shiny sheen and shrewd blindness. Moreover, one is deceived about many things in man because many a shell is shabby and sad and altogether too much shell. I mean, I've seen some very beautiful oyster shells. I've eaten so many different kinds of oysters. They're very beautiful, some of them. So, depends, but I get his point. Like mussel shells are like all the same, black. They're not really that cool. But oyster shells are very different. Much hidden graciousness and strength is never guessed. The most exquisite delicacies find no tasters. Women know this, the most exquisite do, a little fatter, a little slimmer, oh, how much destiny lies in so little. Man is hard to discover, hardest of all for himself. Often the spirit lies about the soul, thus the spirit of gravity orders it. He, however, has discovered himself who says, this is my good and evil. So, you've discovered yourself if you're able to see what is part of your own vices and virtues, it appears what he's saying. With that, he has reduced to silence the mole and dwarf who say, good for all, evil for all. So the mole, like, that's the one who digs in the tunnels and is quite ugly, but they're able to find something about you. There's a mole in the company, spilling all our secrets. The dwarf has a dualistic perspective because you got the happy dwarf, like in Disenchanted, there's Elfo. He's like this weird Smurf dwarf elf thing, and he's always really positive. But then you have the mischievous garden gnomes with the little red hats that people say when they take mushrooms that they see, and they cause them trouble. So there's also like the negative dwarf perspective, like on how you would take, for example, Tyrion Lannister. To his sister, he was an evil little cretin who couldn't be trusted. It was scary of them. And then, like, to others, he was like a good advisor, you know. So the mythology and folktales of dwarves themselves have been both good and bad. The mole has been one who kind of knows your secrets, finds the secrets. It's harder to detect. They're tunnel creatures, so they're going to be in your organization and you're not going to be able to identify them as easy. And they, you know, if you have them, they can kind of ruin your garden because of the holes. And if you have very nice cows, they have a hole in the ground. Your cow steps in there with the hoof, snaps the ankle, now you got to put the cow down. I don't know how many people now, from my understanding, when horses and cows would snap their ankles, for some reason they couldn't rehabilitate some of them. They would just put them down and eat them. Butcher them up, turn them into glue, take the hides, you name it. But a critter that creates holes in the terrain is a problem because of the ankles of your livestock. So, symbolically, when we see him use the word mole and dwarf and then good and evil, that's an interesting thing because you can see the evil and good of the dwarf and the mole. And how in folktales the dwarf is like a sidekick. In The Smiling Friends on Adult Swim, there was a dwarf in the Enchanted Forest, and Pym, they're trying to help him get to the princess's castle, and this dwarf, he seems nice and everything. He has a gift for the princess. Turns out it was like a bomb, and he was a stalker to the princess. So that's what made that episode funny, was because the dwarf, you thought he was nice, but in reality, he was an evil guy, you see. So when I tell you, even in the past, the dynamicism of the dwarf as a figure in folktales, a gnome, dwarf, elf, they have, you know, synonyms and varying attributes. Pointy ears, pointy shoes. You get my point. We're not going to get into semantics of the differentiations, but rather the correlations, right? And so the dwarf is an interesting character to put here. And, you know, when the dragon's gold, if you think of, supposedly, like Smaug the dragon in the Hobbit series, the dwarves, they are the ones who had, and in Lord of the Rings lore, they're the ones who were digging in for gold. Super greedy. And released, dug so deep they released the Balrog, which I have a tattoo of. And so, because of their greed and their lust for power, they released a creature that they couldn't really defeat. you know? And who had, you know, a negative effect because he took over the Mines of Moria, but he also helped Gandalf become Gandalf the White. So, you know? And those dwarves, they were very greedy, right? But then they're going on a quest, right? So it's fascinating when you look at it, like just dwarves in general. But they didn't make them, the hobbits and the dwarves, they didn't seem to be too different in size. So the word dwarf here doesn't always mean a midget. It's like very strange how it's applied. You know, when you think of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So when Nietzsche's writing, we have all that type of culture coming into the perspective here, right? You know. But if you wanted to eat a mole, I don't know if you could eat a mole. Maybe they taste like a squirrel. But if you're starving and you catch a mole, at least you won't starve. So maybe that's one other good aspect of the mole. Alright. Verily, I also do not like those who consider everything good, and this world the best. So, also, the overly optimistic. Because then they've lost reality, right? Then you're just like, I don't like, people who are overly smiling, I never really got along with. Managers who are like, you're like, you're probably a serial killer. There's people who they have that glazed eyes, and like Mormon women do this a lot. They're always smiling. And is this because you're happy, or are you forced to do that and only to show one emotion? Because sometimes there's cult members, they will always be like super happy. They're not allowed to display any type of other emotion because they want to have the cult to where it's like we're only always positive, and if you mention anything raw and real, you're bringing negative energy, they would say, and they just like wouldn't want you around. So there are lots of cults today where forced positivity is lambasted on the individual, you know, and I never agreed with that. And the world is the best. I like the hadith that talks about I'm summarizing it, but it talks about how the earth is the infidels' paradise and the believer's prison, right? And I think that was how we look at it. We're a passing traveler. This isn't the best. The hereafter is the best. So we can't agree with that. Okay, I'm going to pause here because the leaf blower guy is outside. And we're at the 50-minute mark. Alright, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. If you'd like to support my work, you can go to www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there. Go blow some leaves too.